Season 2 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place to learn more about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, expanding your universe of possibility in the world of health and well-being through homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
Hi, folks. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening.
Hello.
You're born ready? Is that what you said?
Yeah, and then I realized that you were recording and that I was not ready, so that's not entirely true.
That's why I clicked the button.
I know. Oh,
So,
here we are.
Here we are.
Podcast day. Friday.
It's Friday. It's fall.
It's beautiful.
The leaves, those bombs from above are starting to...
The bombs.
Yeah. Each of the millions of tiny little bombs. They come down and do stuff to the garden.
Yeah.
So, tell me about your plan.
What?
Your plan for the day.
Oh, the plan for today. I was thinking we'd talk about comfort care. This is the new program that we are starting on palliative and end-of-life care. And I have been fully immersed in it for the last week. So it felt really top of mind. And
how did it begin?
Well, it started, 3 years ago. I was contacted by someone who, oops, we're on video and I have something in my hair here. Sorry. 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I was contacted by someone who was working on a program to deliver alternative and integrative care to people in the death and dying space.
Yeah.
And it's a group that is now called the Lori Project. And it is a tribute, the name is a tribute to this woman, Lori, who used homeopathy as well as Reiki and lots of other modalities, integrative modalities to support her at the transition time. And so we started to work on this with this group. And then we realized that the work that we were doing, because of the setup of HHN, was just going to be its own entity. So we're partnered with the Lori Project. And if you're interested, you can follow them on social media and see some of the things that they're putting out there. It's pretty amazing. But what we're working on is, I think why I wanted to talk about it is because, primarily because last night I went to a dinner with some friends. It was a group of women. I only actually knew one of them, and there were 7 of us, and it was really lovely, actually. And one of the amazing things is that someone said, can everybody just share something that is energizing them or inspiring them or challenging them right now? So each person actually shared something that was actually kind of intimate, considering that nobody knew, only the person who hosted really knew all of us, right? And it was quite beautiful. And so I actually didn't tell you about this, but the first person who spoke said that what she's been thinking about is she's about to turn 60, she's single, and she's thinking about sort of housing in her and sort of living in community when she is, headed into the next phase of her life, and not wanting to be like in an assisted living or in an over 55 kind of a thing, but actually to live in some sort of intentional kind of a community space. And I told her about the place in Dunedin, right? So there's one of Al's friends and his partner live in this amazing it's a primary school that's been refitted, right? Was it a primary school?
Yeah, it was, actually. Yeah, an old school was ready for demolition, and some developers came along and said, let's turn it into I want to say the word communal living space, which it is, but it's also not. And so everyone, you buy your own space, you buy your own, apartment, I suppose. Yeah, but it's in in an environment where there's other folks, there's 3-bedroom places, 2-bedroom places, 1-bedroom places.
And they have shared like the opportunity to participate in communal meals and things like that. Like you don't have to, but you can. Anyway, so I love that idea. And I was so as this conversation came up and different people were, all of us were, I guess the youngest person was 50 and the oldest person was 70. So we were a 20-year span, different phases of life, different phases in our careers and so forth. Anyway, but the point I wanted to make is that what I talked about was that I was working on this project, right? And that it was really super inspiring. And it sort of began this conversation, the combination of this one woman's experience of trying to figure out how to create a different paradigm for aging, not just aging in place, but aging in community. Yeah. And so it became this conversation about sort of the holding on to our agency and being able to make the life that we want, as opposed to taking what's out there. Even if you sort of retrofit something a little bit, it might not be exactly what you want. So anyway, it really hit me that conversation that we were having is so much about what is going into the comfort care program. So just to kind of put it into context, so comfort care, so it's part of Homeopathy Help Now. If you don't know HHN, so we've been around since 2020, so we're heading into our 5th year, started during the pandemic.
March the 23rd.
March 20th.
March 20th.
March 20th, yes. Yeah. And we've seen well over 5,000 cases at this point, acute cases. And because we have all of this incredible infrastructure set up, we were kind of prepared to sort of take it and reframe it a bit to be able to introduce this comfort care program. And the idea is that we've created a 3-tiered structure. So tier 1 is people who have a life-limiting diagnosis. Tier 2 is people who are what we would consider hospice eligible. In other words, they are sort of finished with their extraneous attempts at whatever level of healing, and it's now about palliation and comfort as they're clearly moving into the final phase. And then the 3rd tier is the final stages. And so as I've been working on this program, so of course in the beginning it was like, okay, so we've got, we will treat people who are at that final phase of life, which I've done a bunch of, and it's work that I really love, but it's now become something, it's just grown. And it's kind of amazing. And so it seemed like, well, maybe we could talk about that, because the purpose, I guess I want to be transparent about why I was thinking about talking about this today is yes, to introduce the comfort care program and to talk about what we're doing, but also because I think what has happened organically in the creation of this program and all that has gone into the conversations, the legality, the infrastructure, the vetting of people, the creating of the coursework, all of that, is that as I've learned more and as our team has been learning more, and as we're all talking about all of the new ways that we are approaching conversations around death and dying. Oh, and I should add that 3 of the core team members actually did a death doula course over the summer, right? So really intensely getting involved in learning about what it's like to not just be somebody's homeopath at that phase, but actually to be in some of the literature, they call it the front runner, the person who is always thinking ahead of what needs to be done, to sort of ensure the best care, comfort, and all of that. Anyway, so with all of that, what I realized was that our learning has taken us to these ideas around creating a totally new paradigm. Right. And so that's what I was thinking about. So I've been reading, as everything I can find to talk about the sort of death care paradigm, the, institutional care around death and dying and all of that. It's been a crash course. Anyway, and so I've been thinking about like what it is that we're doing. And I've kind of landed on this idea of rethinking the death and dying paradigm to regain control and agency for the dying person and their families. And obviously, we're not the only people doing this. And I think that's what's so interesting about it, is that we've kind of tapped into a conversation that I realize is happening in all sorts of places.
Yeah.
Right? There are homeopaths who are doing this. I know of a handful of homeopaths, even Kathy Yao, who's who is going to do some teaching with us. She's a death doula, certified as a death doula. Frank Russo, who is one of the, he's a nurse homeopath. He delivered a talk at the Jack last year on it, he and Leah Bello. So these conversations are being had, right? So I thought, well, let's talk about kind of how homeopathy is a part of paradigm shift, and how, this idea that I've been focused on, this that Victor Hugo quote, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. So I wonder if we are, because we're those of us who are really involved in homeopathy, we're sort of, I don't know, kind of in the flow a bit, right? I don't know. What do you think about that? You've been oddly quiet.
Well, I'm quiet for two reasons. One is because this is your baby. And second is because I can't remember the second reason.
Because you're tired.
No, but I was thinking that perhaps the time is right.
Yeah.
For this. I was also reflecting that it's never easy when you're first and when you're leading and doing the pulling, especially when, folks see the value of what's going on. So yeah, those are my thoughts, really.
I mean, you and your team are so involved with the research part. So yesterday, to give an example of how we're kind of teasing this out, and how there's a lot of push-pull with this, right? So our team meets at least once a week for at least an hour, usually 2 hours. And, we're going over all the implementation strategies. How do we actually bring this to fruition? And there are 5 of us that meet regularly, and another 3 who sort of join in to help us deal with all the legal and implementation things. But yesterday's meeting was really interesting because we had to rethink some of the research parts of it, right? So, like, for example, what is the purpose? And even though we're talking about this in relationship to comfort care, I want people to think about this just in terms of your work that you're doing in homeopathy, right? So anytime, like Al, you were just saying, when you're kind of out there in front, I think most of us that are doing anything in homeopathy, we're in front of something because we're not following what's being done. We're kind of creating.
Yeah.
Right. We're creating. So one of the things that came up yesterday was around research, and we were thinking about, well, what do we really want to achieve with our research? And of course, we're talking about comfort care, but I think this is relevant in any of the research we're doing. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and it's a very, very different conversation. So imagine you're running a clinic on pans and pandas, right? Imagine that. So for me, from a research point of view, I'd be wanting to, start to ask questions of that organization. Do you want to start publishing your outcomes? If you want to start publishing your outcomes, then what kind of information do you need to collect? What kind of questions do you want to ask, and what method by which you would go about asking those questions? With this, it's really different.
Actually, I don't know how different I love that you chose the example of pans and pandas, right? Because, and actually, so I'm sure many of our listeners know about Resilience Homeopathy, the clinic that Dr. Jennifer Barr runs, and it's naturopaths using homeopathy in treating pans and pandas. And we met, it was, how long ago was that we met? It was in March. I mean, we talked to Jennifer, but we're trying to think about what, how do we make use of all this data that's out there that all of us have? Anyway, but I love that you chose pans and pandas, because you were talking about like being out in front. I mean, think about what it's like when I teach the pans and pandas curriculum, you've got to first inform people about what it is, what it isn't, what the mainstream is doing when they think about it, how many misdiagnoses there are, what are the treatment, I mean, all of those things, right? And because it's such a brand new field, then it's wide open for how the researchers go. Like, nobody's created the research platforms yet. Do you know what I mean?
Right. So
then the answer is like, what's the most impactful way to go about something?
Well,
isn't it?
But it is. But again, it comes back to that very first point. well, at least a point that I made, hopefully, about what do you want to know? Because is it you want to create a dialogue about what's our experience of treating pans and pandas?
Right, so a qualitative
Good.
article
Yeah.
or series of articles about what that's like. I mean, that's important because in an emerging diagnostic category that the allopaths are really working, if they are acknowledging it at all or struggling for how to treat it. So that qualitative experience is important for.
Yeah, so then you go about that qualitative process of gathering information and then writing about it. But if you want to know the origin story, or if you want to know some of the challenges or tensions, then, the question determines the method.
Right.
And if you want to then, I went straight to outcomes, because so quite often, we end up talking about, when research perspectives, you want to know, are we any good? That question. And therefore, well, you've got to collect data on how are you clients, what have they got before and during and after. And then, if you really want to know, then you've got to compare it with something similar that's in a different laboratory or different environment somewhere. And so, there's those usual kind of research questions. But getting back to you.
Well, because it's the same, but it's totally different. Right. Because Pans and Pandas is, although, in that lecture that I delivered where I trace it back to, the 1500s, right? But it's actually as a real diagnostic or as a real public health issue for children and adults, but particularly for children, it's a different animal. I'm struggling with this because I'm thinking about what we landed on yesterday. Let me switch away from Pans and Pandas into what we're talking about. So within the death and dying space, we were like, okay, well, we've got this 3-tiered program. First is people with a life-limiting diagnosis, the second, hospice eligible, and the third being people in the final stages of life.
Just elaborate on that. What do you mean by life-limiting diagnosis?
So somebody actually, this is really a challenging thing. So when people get a diagnosis for which it's like, outcomes are unlikely to be positive. What's the likelihood somebody's going to come back from this? It's definitely, it would take a miracle. That level of care can and should only be handled by a homeopath who has the cred to be able to do it. And what we realized actually was that for a whole lot of reasons, and I'm going to avoid getting political, we don't have a really good guarantee that someone who is going to see a homeopath, just because that person has credentials after their name, is going to be adequate to take care of a diagnosis of that, of that magnitude.
Yeah.
Not every person. And it almost doesn't matter what their certification or criteria are. They could be a high-level medical doctor with tons of medical, credentials and be unbelievable at their craft and just have a little intro to homeopathy in their back pocket. On the other hand, it could be a person who's got a lot of homeopathy training, but maybe they've been trained in a way that's a lot more sort of esoteric and not grounded in the physiology and, the medical pathology. People need to know what they're getting anyway. So we realized that in order to be able to accept cases like that and to ensure that the practitioner who was taking care of them was beyond qualified to handle it, it required all kinds of other things that we had to do. We had to create a whole vetting process so that nobody gets themselves in a situation as a homeopath where they can't handle the case, and vice versa, that, the clients can be sure. So, got our medical director involved in that and so on and so forth. Anyway, so that's that life-limiting diagnosis. And that, in a way, it's a little bit not superfluous, but it's not necessarily the core of the comfort care program. Comfort care program really is helping people in the final stages of life. But we recognize that once we have once we are out there, and this is, people know that that's what we're doing, that these kinds of cases will come in. So we wanted to make sure that anybody who was accepted into, that tier of care would get the care that they needed, and that we could vouch for that practitioner.
Yeah.
Right.
So that said, the point that got us there was that's not a usual research question, because the outcome is going to be death.
Well, in any of these three categories.
Right. That's not usually the outcome when it comes to research in any health care field.
But I want to go all the way to to tier 3, which is that final transition point, because the conversation was about, okay, so what is it that we want? What is it that we want to do here, right? And what we want to do is to make homeopathy recognized, like a quote unquote normal part of the death and dying experience, which means that we need to be able to get homeopathic remedies in the hands of death doulas, in the hands of hospice providers, which means that we need to be able to demonstrate the efficacy in solving the problems that are difficult to solve in that space. And that was really like a wow moment for us in terms of how we set up the research, because what we realized is we need, we already have been looking at this through the lens of, well, what are the core things that we need to address? That's fairly common. And just to put it in context, so what we did was, the work that I've been doing over the last couple of years is to do a real survey of, almost like a literature review of all the materials that are out there in the death and dying space, including what are not just like the books that are written on it, but what is happening in palliative care, and how is this being handled? And so what we did was we built the whole program around the hospice model so that these two things become interchangeable. So if we are fortunate enough to get homeopathy into the hands of some hospice systems, then we want to be able to easily substitute whatever the hospice providers are used to dealing with. So we came up with 7 categories of suffering. So, and these categories are really for tiers 2 and 3. So people who are hospice eligible and in the final stages. So nausea and vomiting, issues around elimination, whether it's constipation, diarrhea, or issues with people who are being catheterized, skin and wound care, bed sores, dryness, the things that are just a part of that, breaking down the body, anxiety and agitation, pain, respiration and shortness of breath, and then the death rattle. So that final transition phase. Anyway, so those are the categories, and we are looking at it to make it interchangeable with what's being done in the hospice model. And then what was really interesting was that totally informed the way that we would approach the research, because we have a bunch of questions that we might like to ask, all the different the pain scale and the, patient satisfaction scale and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, we realized that if we want to make this work, our questions need to be spot on with questions that may also be asked in the same, in an apples to apples comparison, like in hospice.
Yeah.
Right? Did I say that clearly?
Yeah, maybe I'll repeat it back. So with those categories you've got, if we take someone towards the end of life with skin or wound care, are we collecting data? Are we collecting data that is, and analyzing that data in a way which is going to be able to be comparable with?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I've been sort of working alongside in the background with this one, on this project with you. And then I was really struck by a conversation with a friend of mine, Steve, who works with death and dying kids in New Zealand, of all places. And I was saying, where's the research and what kind of, data gathering are you doing? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads.
Yeah.
And that was a surprise to me. And that's not negligence. It's just that those folks are clinicians.
Yeah.
And if you're a clinician with a big heart, then you're a clinician with a big heart, and that's good. There is, of course, lots of research in end-of-life care.
Right.
But I'm going to assert that a lot of it is not being done by clinicians. And I think that's the difference. I was really surprised. So what I think at the moment and stand to be corrected and all the rest of it, is there's not a lot of literature out there. And therefore, we may well be able to, for example, there's a diarrhea scale that's used for Alzheimer's patients, I found.
Did you?
Right? So obviously, someone that's categorized with Alzheimer's disease that is struggling and perhaps towards the end of life, someone might talk about, okay, well, I really helped them with this drug.
Yeah.
And here's the evidence because we mapped it on the Bristol stool scale and they pooped better.
Right.
So, there's that kind of research. It's not really our kind of research, though, is it?
No, it's been really interesting. And so taking it back to the point of this conversation, which is when you're sort of creating a paradigm shift, then you are like, it's not just, oh, well, we can do this cool thing. If we were just doing the cool thing, we would have done it a couple of years ago. But to create everything around it is like this, it's a big ask. Anyway, and it asks us to, like, I find that the more I'm understanding about what the patient experience is,
right,
that is really super helpful, right?
Well, then we go, and then maybe that's it. Maybe we just put aside all of our, quantitative research tools and just go, let's talk to people. Yeah. Let's turn on the video, turn on the dictaphone machine. What decade am I? Oh my God.
Jeez Louise.
Turn on the app that allows us to record conversations and talk to people about what their experience of dying is.
Well, I mean, that's going to be a whole other thing. But yesterday we were talking about some anecdotal information we have. So we've all kind of gotten into now following people on social media and listening to podcasts all about the death and dying space, right? So a lot of people, if you're listening into this, that you must be into it and you're thinking, oh yeah, I follow hospice nurse Julie too, right? Because she is sort of she's got a New York Times bestseller and she's just really been just one of those voices to something that has not been a regular part of the conversation. Anyway, Molly, yesterday, one of our team members was telling us about something she heard on Hospice Nurse Julie on her social media. She was talking about a case of someone who had was dying of cancer and had irretractable vomiting, nausea, vomiting, was just so sick. And they had exhausted all of the opportunities to use the tools that they had. And they were discussing with the family having to put her into a medically induced coma. That was all they had left. And we had this moment of like, whoa, right? Because that type of situation is something that we all have been faced with helping people through, right? So anyway, that is where we've landed. How can we conduct our research in such a way that it's focused on where the areas of the current system are struggling?
Yeah.
Right. And then part of it is just because of the nature of what homeopathy is about and the ways in which practitioners are engaging in, just in our conversations with our clients. I have been thinking, and I think our team, we've had some conversations about this, that many homeopaths who are drawn to this type of work will probably be inclined to take on more of it, right? So the course has naturally taken on more of the broader scope, not just, give arsenicum in this instance, but give cuprum in that instance, or give whatever. But actually to talk about, the ways that we can sort of facilitate holding space in some of these times. And finally, which point not there?
I want to know why you've got two slides that say Kent written on them.
Why do I have two slides with Kent written on them? Because I have...
What has he got to say about it?
Kent? Oh, this Kent, How to Ensure an Easy Death. You want me to read that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a quote from James Tyler Kent. He says, I am frequently asked what should be done in times of great suffering for immediate relief. To those who desire to obtain reliable information and wish to practice in accordance with our principles, I would say, take the symptoms of each individual case and select the remedy capable of producing similar symptoms. In a general way, This is all that would be expected of me for an answer to the question by those who are conversant with our materia medica. It has come to pass that I'm invited frequently to stand at the bed of moribund patients, whom I never attended during their curable ills, and as many times do I thank the Grand Master for the wonderful means of allaying the pangs of the flesh, without resort to the necessity of departing from that homeopathic law which I have so many times pronounced universal, even in the last moments. Isn't that beautiful?
It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know you said that.
Anywho.
That's the writings.
No, this is actually from, you've got me just on my side and not on my source. It's actually in an article in like the Homeopathic Recorder or something, but I could find the source for anybody who wants it. So anyway, this has been, so I thought it might be interesting to talk just for a few minutes. We'll wrap it up, but just to talk for a few minutes on this project, but not from the standpoint just of what we're doing, but on how I think the biggest impact for me is realizing that the folks who are working on this are ushering in a paradigm, ushering in language around the death and dying space, along with homeopathy, in a way that might make we hope, could make an impact greater than just having more practitioners dealing with people who are in their final phases of life. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like if we can adequately communicate it. I mean, think about all the amazing people who've already signed up for the course, which, by the way, the course starts on October 25th. It's 3 sessions, 3 2-hour sessions. And what we've got...
live.
3 live sessions, but people can do it asynchronously if they want. And we will offer it again we'll offer it again later, and it will be available asynchronously, but it will never be done just individually. It'll always be done as a part of a cohort, because we've learned that this work is just, it really takes a toll, and you kind of need the conversations about it. And so, yeah. But I think the course I think it's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Of course it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, well... I mean,
I mean, I don't know if you want to tell stories or anything, but just since watching you clinically over the last decade, you know, you've had your fair share of end of life care, haven't you?
I really have.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's amazing. Can I tell a little story? 2 stories, actually.
Nice. One
was someone that was not a client of mine. Her sister, I knew somebody that her sister knew. And they asked me to come in at the very end of this woman's life. And I used to always make house calls when I did this, and I would sit with the family and whatever. And so I went, and they lived in this big high rise in New York City. And I get there, and they had the woman who was dying. She was in one of the bedrooms, and they had a care person there with her. And then the family, this woman's children, the sisters, and the husband were all sitting there. And when I got there, I hadn't seen the person who was dying, and they were talking as if she was going to go to the Hamptons that weekend. Like they literally had not come to terms with, they literally were talking about taking her to the Hamptons. And when I went and saw her, she was like paper. Do you know what I mean? Like there was no way this person was being moved anywhere. Anyway, but I realized at that point how much of the work was that, because that was the first time that I had done it with a stranger. Do you know what I mean? And it was how much of the work was getting the family, the caregivers, the people who love the dying person to the same page, to be able to accept that their loved one is, heading to the next phase of their whatever there is after. And part of that work is when you do that, then it allows the person to pass more easily and more peacefully, because they don't have this hold on them. And so I actually spent most of the time talking to the family. After I saw, the woman she was really ready, and she passed within a few days. Anyway, another story, which is totally different. This was one of my favorite clients ever. She was an older woman. I'd worked with her for a number of years. I used to make house calls to her before she was, dying, but I would ride my bike over, and I'd bring my bike in the house. She was adorable. And I would do her consultation at the dining room table. And there would often be family members there. I got to know the family. They were just a lovely group. And and they had the whole family used homeopathy, so they had lots of access to remedies and so forth. And so when she was getting to her final stages, they could very easily just had administered the remedies, but they called and they asked if I would come and sit with them. I could cry just saying it. It was amazing because I had just been, a part of their family's, life. And so I got to sit with them, with their rabbi, just to sit at, I sat at her side for several hours when she was in her, on her last day. And so there is a way in which this work, I think, is so, I don't know, there's something about it that it hits you really deeply, because when you can facilitate a passing, you can be a part of a passing that is peaceful. It's such a gift. And anyway, and so what these two examples, what it brought me to, because they're sort of the opposite, right? There was this one family that was just holding on. They weren't ready to go. The person who was dying wasn't. In this other situation where they all were there and ready, and they were actually able to be almost, I don't want to say celebratory, because that's a little bit, I mean, they did celebrate her life. She did this beautiful, amazing life, but they were there. It was, but it reminds me of a Harry Potter reference in Harry Potter 1, Devil's Snare, right? In the beginning when, so when they have to get to Harry and Hermione and Ron, it's their first big adventure, and they have to get to the place where,
they go under the three-headed dog.
They have to go under the three-headed dog, and then they have to drop through these vines, right?
Yeah.
And Hermione, of course, remembers from herbology that devil's snare, you have to be calm, and then it drops you through, right? And then Harry, she got him to do it fairly quickly, but Ron was fighting and whatever, and that just made it a tighter grip on him, and he couldn't let go. And so then there was not just stress for him and for Ron and his experience, but also the people who were waiting for him, right? They were stressed because he was struggling. And so there's this way in which what we do as homeopaths, right, is it's like it's a way to allow people to relax into the passage. And I've been reading, so many books about this over the summer, and this language that seems to be emerging is that it's transition, like in birth, right? So, and maybe this comes through the whole death doula movement, right? That you have doulas for transitions of any kind. And we're all now used to a birth doula, right? Helps the mother, the laboring mother, but then at that moment of transition, right, which is when, the baby's head is crowning, and it's the most, the ring of fire moment that all women who have had, have gone through the birth process know about. But that moment, you're in it by yourself. And you need to be prepared for that transition space. But everything that you do before, and all the people who are prepared around you, can help you through that. And when you see enough births where homeopathy is a part of that experience, that allows it to happen so gracefully, it doesn't mean that it's going to be without any incident, but it's certainly a lot more. Oh, it's just it's a process, right? So the new language I don't know if it's a new language, the language that I've been coming across is the comparison of birth and death, and that process of the transition toward death. And the biggest learning that was this idea that the body knows how to live and the body knows how to die. Right. And so because homeopathy works with the body and its natural inclination to follow its path, then it would stand to reason that the knowledge of how to die, that a homeopathic remedy can facilitate that process just in the same way. Right. So that way that I think we can approach this work, and that I hope we're going to be able to really get across in the course and in the, in the coaching work that we'll do with people as they're going through learning how to be comfortable in this space, is around that idea that, that a homeopathic remedy, like, we're not giving the homeopathic remedy. Wait, a person doesn't die because they get a remedy. They're given a remedy because they're getting ready to die. And that we can start to see the ways in which a remedy can both restore health, but that restoration of balance is the same thing, right, in those final phases. Anyway, so.
I really like it.
Do you?
especially what you said about transition and doulas. Well done.
I was thinking I'm going to put this out there in case anybody wants to steal it. If I had a practice where I was just doing end of life work, I would call it the 11th hour.
Oh, wow.
What do you think about that?
The 11th hour.
Yeah. Right?
It's pretty good.
Maybe I'll just write a book called The 11th Hour and put it on the list. But if anybody wants that title, just let me know.
Can I tell you something?
Tell me.
Different topic, completely different
Let's
topic.
do it. Totally different topic.
We got a letter.
What kind of letter?
Said, did Hahnemann, this is Bex, New York City, did Hahnemann mix astrology and homeopathy?
No.
If he did, please cite the references for me to research. If not, this kind of information undermines your stated theme of scientific research. And I think what it was somewhat of a you and I maybe misspeaking on the podcast because I got a transcript of what we said. And so, and it's really important. So Bex, NYC, is that no, Hahnemann did not mix homeopathy and astrology.
He did acknowledge that the position of the planets, right, would have an impact. He talked about meteoric and telluric influences.
Right.
So I don't know that it would be the kind of astrology, but I want to say that in Hahnemann's time, while astrology might not be considered the same philosophical construct as homeopathy, in Hahnemann's time, if you're talking about, the 18th century, that was just a normal part of the conversation, right? And so
an acknowledgement that the qualities that made up the human being would have been somewhat determined by where the planets were at our conceptional birth.
Or just the way that we moved through cycles in the universe would also be connected to planetary influences. Yeah. So that's, So they're talking about astrology. First of all, it was me, because I'm looking at the transcript, my knowledge, minimum. So we'll just leave it at that, right? But I like to listen to experts who are able to contextualize things. Anyway, and so, it wasn't meant to be a serious research conversation. So we apologize to the person who felt misled by an offhanded remark.
There you go.
We can always do better. You didn't tell me I was going to be, Anyway.
I just came to mind.
Look, and I said in that, I said I could do better.
I totally butchered that.
Yeah. I also acknowledged, just in case you're wondering, I acknowledged in my quote that my knowledge based on this is quite little, and that I probably butchered the, whatever I was saying. So sorry about that. Anyhow. All right.
Folks, that is that's comfort care.
Yeah.
Yeah, a nice introduction to it. And you'll be hearing more. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. If you're interested in it, if you are a homeopath and you think that this is something that you want to be a part of your practice, let us know. We're building out the team. We'll go live. Our soft launch will start probably in November, probably next month.
Coming soon.
Yeah, coming soon. And the course, like I said, goes live. We start on the 25th of October.
That is 3 weeks away.
Yeah. All right. See everybody.
Ciao. Take care. Bye.
Hey, homeopathic practitioners. This one's for you. Home Foundation needs your help. The 2024 Practitioner Workforce Survey is a critical project that will examine the practice characteristics of homeopaths in North America. By participating, you will contribute to the larger mission of the practitioner-generated research network of Home Foundation that strives to improve the field of homeopathy for a better tomorrow. Learn more at homefoundation.org. That's home, HOHM, foundation.org.